This just changed the map of the Middle East. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced that Britain will allow the United States to use British military bases in operations targeting Iran. Not considering. Not reviewing. Approved. Starmer insists the UK is not joining offensive strikes. But when American forces launch from British bases, the line between support and participation gets very thin. So, what does this actually mean? Is this collective self-defense, or the first step toward deeper involvement? And how will Iran respond? Let's break it down.
Yesterday, I spoke to you about the situation in the Gulf and explained that the United Kingdom was not involved in the strikes on Iran. That remains the case. Over the last 2 days, Iran has launched sustained attacks across the region at countries who did not attack them. They've hit airports and hotels where British citizens are staying. This is clearly a dangerous situation. We have at least 200,000 British citizens in the region, residents, families on holiday, and those in transit. I ask all our people in the region to please register your presence and follow Foreign Office travel advice. I know this is a deeply worrying time, and we will continue to do all we can to support you. Our armed forces, who are located across the region, are also being put at risk by Iran's actions. Yesterday, Iran hit a military base in Bahrain, narrowly missing British personnel. The death of the supreme leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. Their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. Our decision that the UK would not be involved with the strikes on Iran was deliberate, not least because we believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement, one in which Iran agrees to give up any aspirations to develop a nuclear weapon. But Iran is striking British interests nonetheless, and putting British people at huge risk, along with our allies across the region. That is the situation we face today. Our partners in the Gulf have asked us to do more to defend them, and it is my duty to protect British lives. We have British jets in the air as part of coordinated defensive operations, which have already successfully intercepted Iranian strikes. But the only way to stop the threat is to destroy the missiles at source, in their storage depots, or the launchers which are used to fire the missiles. The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request, to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. The basis of our decision is the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. That is in accordance with international law, and we are publishing a summary of our legal advice. We are not joining these strikes, but we will continue with our defensive actions in the region. And we will also bring experts from Ukraine together with our own experts to help Gulf partners shoot down Iranian drones attacking them. I want to be very clear. We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But Iran is pursuing a scorched earth strategy, so we are supporting the collective self-defense of our allies and our people in the region, because that is our duty to the British people. It is the best way to eliminate the urgent threat and prevent the situation spiralling further. This is the British government protecting British interests and British lives.
This is a major escalation. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has just announced that the United Kingdom will allow the United States to use British military bases in operations targeting Iranian missile capabilities. Let's be clear about what this means and what it doesn't. Starmer emphasized that the UK was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran. He repeated that Britain is not joining offensive action. But after Iran launched retaliatory attacks across the Gulf, including strikes that reportedly hit a military base in Bahrain and endangered British personnel, the calculation changed. According to Starmer, the US requested permission to use British bases for what he described as a specific and limited defensive purpose, targeting missile depots and launch systems to prevent further Iranian strikes. The UK has now approved that request. That is not symbolic. That is operational support. Here's why this matters geopolitically. When the US uses foreign bases for military operations, it signals alliance alignment. It embeds the host nation into the conflict architecture, even if technically not joining offensive combat operations. Britain may not be firing the missiles, but it is enabling the infrastructure. Starmer framed the move as collective self-defense under international law. He stressed that British jets are already engaged in defensive intercept operations and that Iranian actions are directly threatening British citizens and personnel. He also invoked Iraq, explicitly saying the UK remembers the mistakes of that war and will not repeat them. That line is politically important. The Iraq War still casts a long shadow over British foreign policy. Any perception of sliding into another Middle Eastern conflict carries serious domestic political risk. So Starmer is threading a needle. Support the US. Protect British nationals. Avoid being drawn into full-scale war. But here's the strategic reality. Allowing US forces to launch operations from British bases makes the UK a more visible participant in the conflict ecosystem. Iran will see it that way, regardless of semantic distinctions between offensive and defensive. And Iran has already shown willingness to strike regionally. This raises three critical questions. First, does this deter Iran or escalate the cycle? Targeting missile depots may degrade capabilities in the short term. But historically, direct strikes on sovereign territory often invite further retaliation. Second, how does this affect NATO unity? If Iran expands retaliatory actions, will other NATO allies be drawn in? Or will this remain a US-UK coordinated framework? Third, what does this mean for the broader US-Iran confrontation? Support the US. Protect British nationals. Avoid being drawn into full-scale war. But here's the strategic reality. Allowing US forces to launch operations from British bases makes the UK a more visible participant in the conflict ecosystem. Iran will see it that way, regardless of semantic distinctions between offensive and defensive. And Iran has already shown willingness to strike regionally. This raises three critical questions. First, does this deter Iran or escalate the cycle? Targeting missile depots may degrade capabilities in the short term. But historically, direct strikes on sovereign territory often invite further retaliation. Second, how does this affect NATO unity? If Iran expands retaliatory actions, will other NATO allies be drawn in? Or will this remain a US-UK coordinated framework? Third, what does this mean for the broader US-Iran confrontation? But history shows that limited military permissions can expand under pressure. The key phrase in his address was this: "We are not joining these strikes." That distinction will be tested by events on the ground. Because once a base is used for kinetic operations, the political firewall between support and participation can thin very quickly. For the United States, this is also significant. Access to British bases expands operational flexibility and signals that Washington is not isolated diplomatically. In moments of escalation, alliance optics matter. The coming days will determine whether this move stabilizes the region or pulls the UK closer to a widening conflict. One thing is certain. This is no longer just a U.Est-Iran flashpoint. The United Kingdom is now directly embedded in the operational framework. And that changes the strategic map. Stay informed. This story is developing rapidly, and we'll continue breaking it down as it unfolds.